year was 1666, and London was on fire. For 4 days, the city was burning. The old medieval town was 80% gone by the time the flames had stopped. The medieval town that was enclosed and encased within the old city walls, nearly destroyed and devastated. St. Paul's Cathedral, rubble. 13,000 homes, gone. It was ashes, dust, and silence. But in the rubble, there lay an extraordinary opportunity, and that opportunity was an ability to rebuild London from the ground up. Welcome to the Clayton Vance Podcast, where we discuss the art and the soul of architecture and why the world looks the way it does and what we can do about it. Now, in this episode, we're going to discuss some of the fundamentals of what gives something a sense of place and embodies that character. And it has to do with the urban design, the urban street fabric. It's the DNA that actually turns cities into places that have character, charm, and where we want to be. So let's begin. So imagine you there in London, 1666, and you're standing amid all of this ash and rubble, amid all of this tragedy. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what on earth do you do? Well, to an urban designer and an architect, sure, this is tragedy, but more than that, it is possibility. What we have now is a blank canvas. All the utilities are in place, and we just have to rebuild this thing in the fashion that we desire. Now, what's interesting, entering Sir Christopher Wren, one of the great Enlightenment philosophers of the late 1600s. Now, he was also an architect. And what his plan was to come in and take those medieval crooked streets. And if you think about it, if you've ever been to an old medieval town, you know that those streets can be like 8 feet wide to 10 feet to 16 feet at most. And if you have a horse and a buggy that's probably 6 feet wide and another horse and a buggy that's probably 6 feet wide coming the other way, if you're a pedestrian, you have a really good chance of getting kicked by something or having your toes run over. These medieval streets weren't convenient by any stretch of the imagination. When we walk through them now, because they're part of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, we find them charming and romantic because it's just pedestrians. But imagine yourself, horses going up and down those things and pooping everywhere, and you have to clean up all that mess and debris and people putting their trash and their refuse. There isn't a lot of room. They are dirty and grimy and gross. There's a reason the Enlightenment began to come out during this period of time. It's like, we got to do something about these cities. It always had to do with their living conditions, right? And so Sir Christopher Wren, he wasn't any different, but he was a brilliant guy. And he said, I want to take these crooked streets and I want to rationalize them, because after all, one of the premises of this channel is that architecture is the physical manifestation of the values of the people who make it. And now we have an opportunity to embed Enlightenment values into the central city of London. We can widen the streets, make grand boulevards. It's almost like a Rome rising from the ashes up north. But the reality is that it never happened. And why didn't it happen? Property rights, lot lines, deeds, utilities, streets. Once that land is divided and once it's deeded out, and if those laws are in place that actually give people property rights, it is very, very, very difficult to undo that. And so when the surveys are inked, that ownership is recorded, and these are nearly impossible to undo. So the fire, it may have destroyed all the buildings, but it did not erase the legal property boundaries. So London was rebuilt. And it was built with better materials, a lot more stone and a lot less wood. But it was built on the bones of the ancient medieval plan. Sure, a few streets were widened and a few better streets were put in place. But some of that central, really romantic part of London that we love today was built within that fire. And so, lesson number one that we learned from London. Once you legally set the framework for a city, you set its trajectory. To understand why this matters and why it affects us, we need to zoom out a little bit. Let's go back in history. There's a tale of 3 eras that we need to cover. Number one, the Roman era and its grid pattern that it set up, and then the medieval era, and then the Enlightenment era. And America has and was born and was birthed in the Enlightenment era. And we have in America the Jeffersonian grid. And that was laid out across the entire country in a nice gridded pattern where there could be rational, straight, gridded streets, towns, and cities. However, but it began not with the Enlightenment, it began with Rome. Now, In ancient Rome, when they built a city, it would typically be a military town that would go out and form up, okay, here's where we're going to put a city. And they would have an east-west access street, a north-south access street, and in the center, there was a forum. And in the forum existed all of your typical things you needed for all of your daily living, your shops, your governmental buildings, your temples, all the stuff that revolved around the public civic life of Rome. And what's interesting is these cities were generally contained within walls, and those streets radiated out to gates. And within the walls, you lived within a community where essentially most people knew everyone. And because everyone more or less knew everyone, you lived in a very cohesive sense of duty and being. You never had an opportunity to go off the rails because everyone could check each other. It was the ideal Roman city, and these were built everywhere. There's still ruins that happen in like Timgad, Libya, I believe. And the remnants of these ancient Roman cities still exist in almost every major European town. They were never fully destroyed because those ancient Roman cities eventually turned into really windy, crooked medieval streets. We could take you through a video where I actually go through and diagram out how you can tell where the ancient cities are. They're mostly UNESCO World Heritage Sites now that you can wander through. It's all the charming streets that we love in the beautiful ancient world. But then what happened in era number 2, order essentially gave way to chaos. The Roman grids were recycled, reshaped, bent, and all of a sudden, all these really nice straight streets turned into windy, narrow lanes framed by timber houses. Towers sprouted, then they collapsed, then they rebuilt. This recycling of materials happened over and over and over again. For centuries, cities layered history upon history until the old grids turned into a winding web. So some of the issues that they had in medieval living that drew out the Enlightenment was how fast disease spread when people were in such tight quarters, what to do with waste in such tight quarters. There were many significant issues that ended up making severe problems in these living conditions. And now in today's world, the irony is because we've solved all the problems over the last few hundred years in terms of plumbing and clean water and disease-free everything, they are now some of the most absolutely romantic places to be. San Gimignano in Italy, been there a few times, and you just lose yourself winding around the streets. The mystery, that sense of discovery as you go from street to street where you can't see what's around the corner and you discover a new little church or a new little shop or something else like that. It's so romantic. Like when you're walking through Bruges, Belgium, if you've ever had waffles there or chocolate there, you have so many different plazas and squares and open markets, but you can't ever figure out where you're going because these streets are so narrow and wind everywhere. It's so romantic, so charming. But at the time when the Enlightenment was starting to come about, there was a lot of misery. In fact, it was in this medieval quarter of Edinburgh where I was wandering one time before Harry Potter was even a real big deal. There was a tiny little sign in the window of this cafe that said, "The place where J.K. Rowling invented Harry or wrote Harry Potter." And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I think book 1 or 2 had been out for a little bit. And so I walked in, and as I walked into this cafe, I got my food at the front, wandered to the back, and in the back of this cafe was this huge plate glass window that overlooked the medieval city down below and the castle above on the hill. And all of a sudden I could see it all. I'm like, holy cow, I get it now. That's Hogwarts. These are the little villages. And sitting there, she invented an entire new world that actually existed within a world that actually existed. And that's the magic of it all. That's the magic of real great urban design and texture and layer and community, great architecture, building with natural materials. It inspires storytelling beyond what we can imagine. And so that romance that you get in these old medieval towns, we get that today and we love it. And you don't get that in a nice tidy grid, but that's what they were looking for in era number 3, which was the Enlightenment. As the Enlightenment was beginning to form, they were trying to solve a lot of problems. And one of them was to rationalize some of these streets so people could actually find their way around a little bit easier. And so at the beginning of the Enlightenment, what they're trying to do is just rationalize these street grids. Ancient Roman planning had been rediscovered. Vitruvius was there. They understood the Roman grid, and they realized this is a very rational way to build cities. It makes sense. And they started doing that. And when you look at ancient maps, you can actually tell where the old Roman grid is, and then that first layer of medieval ring around that, and then the rational city. And it's interesting because each of them have a slightly different texture, but the ones everyone goes to that we still find the most charming is the ancient Roman that turned medieval. We have brilliant, beautiful places in the Enlightenment cities, but they just don't have that same sort of charm. And it's really interesting that way. But during this Enlightenment, which is when America was formed in the late 1700s, it was all of these rational thinkers trying to think of better government, trying to think of better economics, trying to think of better ways of doing things. The Industrial Revolution was starting to come online, and a lot of development was beginning to take place. So the rational thinkers of the Enlightenment essentially took a look at those medieval cities and said, enough is enough. We're not doing that anymore. We want order. We want wide boulevards. We want air, light, and reason. One of the perfect examples of this type of thinking is Paris. Paris was an old medieval city, and then Napoleon came in, brought his architect Haussmann along, and boom, they destroyed the medieval city and put in the wide boulevards and the grand, epic streets that Paris has today. And the reality is, I love it. If you've ever seen Paris or been to Paris, wide boulevards, grand vistas, epic streets, and they just go on forever. The Parisian scale is huge. It is not medieval. And so even like Rome, right, it was redesigned and reshaped by the popes in order to create larger processional streets, to create more beautiful vistas, to rationalize and connect all of the significant squares and plazas. And then in America during the Enlightenment era, after the Revolutionary War had concluded, 1785, they did the land ordinance, which did this rational grid across the entire U.S. that formalized townships, ranges, and all this type of stuff so that we could have a very rational property rights distribution of land. And that American survey influences how every city is developed today. So in the end, London's fire happened when all this reason, rationality was coming into fashion and had the perfect opportunity to rebuild itself in this really nice formalized grid. However, I think we're grateful it didn't actually happen. It couldn't be like Rome and Paris because, in all honesty, property rights. When the laws were set in place and because property rights were good enough in England, people just couldn't come in eminently, domain everything, and demolish and redo. They didn't have dictators. They didn't have people with that much power and governmental power and authority to come in and just wipe out swaths of neighborhoods and redo it all. And this is significant because it helps you understand what level of authority is actually required to come down on an already existing framework of network of streets and grids and houses and everything, and come in, buy up all the land, tear all the houses down, and redo a city. Doing it from a greenfield perspective, new and fresh, a lot easier to do, and it's a much more democratic process. However, the laws and rules are set into motion, and like I said earlier, development determines destiny. Here's where it actually touches you and it touches me, and it affects us on a daily basis. Development truly is destiny. We also start with the premise that architecture is, by nature, urban design also, is the resulting effect of the values of the people that make it. It is the physical manifestation of those things that we hold dear, whether they be laws, ordinances, enlightenment, philosophy, necessity through living, and in terms of what they did in the Middle Ages. It's like whatever your values are, that is what your cities will look like. And right now, we have generated a world that loves technology and loves engineering. And so we use math and numbers to calculate certain things, and we have asked the wrong questions on how to build a great city. We ask about how we can move more traffic. We ask about how we can get people from here to there better. But we haven't asked, how do you create a great city? Because once those property lines are recorded, once we have put these in stone, they are almost impossible to change. Let's take a few examples real quick that are more recent than Middle Ages. Just last year, fires burned down huge swaths of Southern California. And with that, I guarantee you, everyone's just going to rebuild on the property lines that actually still exist. Things aren't going to get wiped out. They're not going to be putting in a bunch of new streets. That's just the nature of it. Katrina flooded whole areas of New Orleans a couple decades ago. Everything was built on those same streets, those same property lines. In the end, it really is only moments where you have dictators like Napoleon, where they can come down and just buy up swaths of existing stuff and just remake and reshape cities. We don't have that opportunity. So what we do stays. It's a permanent feature. It's something that we need to consider because the developments that we're doing right now, the strip malls, the cul-de-sacs, the parking lots, the freeways, we're creating the skeleton that our descendants will inherit. And there is not a city around that I have seen developed that has the same charm. Because when we go on vacation, we're going to places like Paris and Rome and Florence in the U.S., like Savannah, St. Augustine, beautiful places, beautiful cities, Santa Barbara. There are so many beautiful old towns in Santa Fe that have that old world charm. And we are not actually giving our spouse a call and saying, hey, you want to go take a romantic walk down a Walmart parking lot or the asphalt in Target? Because, wow, just love being surrounded by all of this concrete block. No. We don't do that. We go to places with charm. We go to places with character. And if we can get that through our heads, we can begin to understand, hey, guess what? We can actually live in a place that feels like a vacation because we choose. It is our choice to create the world in which we live. And we can make it more beautiful. We can make it more charming. And we don't have to sacrifice convenience to do it. I have quoted Shakespeare before that all the world is a stage and we're merely players with our entrances and our exits. But it is more than that. It's not just a backdrop. Architecture and urban design actually help script our lives. They tell us where we go. They tell us where we can gather. They tell us where we can shop. It tells us all of those things on how to run our lives. It minimizes our choice in today's development world. One of our goals, and my goal as an urban designer and architect, is when I go to and design new cities, what I want to do is I'm trying to maximize people's choice and proximity to all of their needs. Because when we don't do that, and we say that all of the poor people live in this area, all the rich people live in this area, all the old people live here, the young couples live here, all of the people with kids live here, we're segregating all of the pieces of the pie into such a degree. And I'm afraid as we continue to go down this development pattern, that we will forever embed within these particular neighborhoods things that are irredeemable, that can't be fixed. So what do we learn from London? That once you lay the bones of a city, they're nearly impossible to undo. That property lines, streets, utilities, they lock in destiny, which means we have to get development right the first time. Because cities aren't just backdrops for our lives, they are scripts for our lives. They tell us where to walk, where to gather, how to see ourselves. The London fire gave the city a chance to start over, and it didn't, which makes me wonder, what chances are we squandering? If development is destiny, then the real question for us is, what kind of destiny are we building?